And we're live. Good afternoon, Karen. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thanks, Kevin. How are you doing today and the week been?
Good. It's been a busy week. Been crazy busy on my side, and I've to the point where I've missed some of my pointers, and I have to apologize. But it's been a hectic one. And good afternoon to everyone live listening out there. And welcome to the Coaching Hour. It's a live space where coaching meets conversation and a transformation happens in real time. And it's been a fantastic conversation in the last session that we had, because Karen, it's been so nice to have you. And we've been talking about a difficult subject matter, right? And essentially, I think before we just kick off into it, give us a bit of just insight about you and who you are, and a little bit so that the audience gets to know you, and why are we talking about addiction? Give us a bit of context, Karen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kevin. And hello and welcome to everybody. As you can hear, I'm quite passionate about these topics, and it's super to have another session where we can unpack it even deeper on different levels. And, it's interesting. As I was growing up, in my lifestyle as well, there was always some kind of sickness happening in the family, and you had to be really resilient around mental health and well-being. So it kind of led me into the psychology field and into the coaching field to support others who are going through something in their family or even themselves. And there's so many topics around mental health and well-being, and that kind of drew me into the training section of it. So I'm all about awareness. So you'll get that. It's all about awareness, all about insights, and gaining knowledge. So what we don't know is what we don't know. But once we go and we come to sessions like this, we go like, oh, what did Karen just say there? Oh, okay, maybe I need to get some more information around it. So as a coach and a counselor and a trainer, and also I do things like emotion aid, a lot around stress and anxiety. I've done some of those talks as well. So very much in our society and where we live right now, life is stressful, So that's where I sit. I sit in that go-to action space.
I love that. And I think that's why, part of this conversation is so important, because, it's, although, the word addiction sounds like a very heavy word, and, people don't necessarily, it's not something that people want to admit to or say, that's something I have a problem with. We know that in society, especially with the struggles that South African society go through, part of what we struggle, a large part of what we struggle with, is addiction. And and that's why we got an overwhelming response of last week's conversation, with lots of questions, and we didn't even get to all the questions. So hopefully we've got some extra questions happening here today. And I think that's the just to preface, as we spoke just before we came on the live, is coaching in itself, going through a session like this is about creating space for people to talk, and it predominantly, and I just say predominantly, but for me also, it's not a place of judgment, it's a place of conversation and understanding. So if you are listening on the live today, guys, please feel free to ask questions. And I think on the live stream chats, you can also ask an anonymous question. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. And I think, Karen, that's essential for us to set that position to start with.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Kevin. And I think addictions is a difficult topic, as we shared when we were live last time. So we're going to go a little bit of a recap over what we did talk about, and then I'm going to share some more insights. So I always start with sharing insights and awareness, and then allow for the listeners to get some of that awareness, and then to ask questions around that, because there's so many. When we think of addictions, we just think of substance abuse. But there are so many, and things that we didn't think that we could get addicted to. And there's also that fine line between recreational and then moving over to the addictions side of things as well. So it is really about, you might be finding or getting some insight today and saying, like, I noticed that about myself, or I noticed that about somebody in my family. So it's always very important to have a go-to person, especially a professional who you can go to or trust, and as you say, non-judgmental, because your friends and family, they've got plenty of advice for you, right? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karen, just to start off with a bit of recap, because we do have some time. In the last couple of sessions, the wonderful Linda Remke joining us as well on the show, and we started off with touching on some emotional intelligent areas. We looked at self-awareness and self-management, and even today's conversation will lend itself to the self-awareness and self-management areas. Also, other areas that are considered as social awareness and relationship management, right? So all of these tie into, what we experience from a coaching position, and what you could experience with your coach, especially if it's a topic like today's topic. We also then just touched on the 6 human needs, which important for all of us as humans to actually connect to. From a certainty, variety, significance, love, connection, growth, and contribution perspective, there's a beautiful assessment that's available to anyone that wants to go and see what that highest need is. And part of these experiences that we have, and part of why we get coaches very often, is because sometimes we are not certain about something. We don't feel as significant as we could feel. We feel disconnected, and we don't experience love at the level that we'd like to experience. So there's very many areas around coaching that actually supports why we do what we do and why we're so passionate about it. But moving into that topic of today and lending from last week, take us through just a bit of quick summary of today's conversation and where we are leading to with this conversation, Karen.
Super, thanks, Kevin. And I like those needs as well, because we often, that can lead us into using substance or maybe process just because we're not able to grasp that and have that professional support.
Yeah.
So what is addiction? It's a psychological and physical inability to stop consuming a chemical, drug, activity, or substance, even though it's causing psychological harm or physical harm. So there's a questionnaire that you can also take around addictions and see where you fit in that. And that helps you to understand, is it something like normal? We say, what's normal? So normal has many definitions, but if it's always like we talk about, if it's impacting your life. So if the substance or the behavior is impacting your life, then it's something to look at and see, where can I get support in that? And often people don't get support because it's a coping mechanism. So let's get into some of those substances. All right. So what are the types of addictions? I'm just going to recap this very quickly. If you were on our call before, you would have heard about these, but if you're new, just have a look at some of these. We generally will think of abuse or addiction to drugs or substances. And you can see on the list here, it's cocaine, it's crack, it's ecstasy, it's heroin. In South Africa, we have many, even inhalants, glue, petrol, all of these things that alter your mind state. So think of it as altering your mind state. It's something that gives you a euphoric kind of feeling, and it's got a lot to do with the neuroscience of dopamine. Dopamine is our feel-good hormone, and these substances will create more dopamine in the brain as well. So prescription medication, a lot of those prescription medications have all of those addictive qualities to them. And then we've also got the process ones like gaming, digital devices, and those are the process. So it's like the levels. We get addicted to the levels of these processes. And we also have things like eating disorders, because there are control disorders like bulimia and anorexia. And we also have bulkorexia. I don't know if we spoke about this one last time, Kevin, when you're bulking up, right? You're doing that over exercise. We've got lots of things that we become like, yeah, it becomes our, like, we're not just doing an hour or two of workout a day, we're doing most of the day, and all we're doing is thinking about these things. So gambling, we spoke quite a bit about as well. That's something I'm very passionate about. I get very upset when I see these gambling ads, because we know how highly addictive gambling is. You can gamble on your phone, you can gamble wherever you are, and it's linked to your bank account. And I'll share quickly those stats that are quite scary to look at as well. And then shopping, and then the exercise, or even sugar. So of course, some of these are going to be more harmful than others. You know, the substances will affect your physical and biology, where the process is a bit more of a slower, but it affects your daily living as well, your relationships, a lot about what's going on for you and your mental health. So those are our various types, and then just our substances and our different. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so not in order of priority. You can just look through some of these, or I'm not going to go through everything, but maybe you've heard of some of them, maybe you haven't. If you haven't, just jot them down. You can Google them and see what kind of process orientating mechanism happens in the brain or the behavior as well. We've got oxycodone, we've got ecstasy, crack, ketamine, heroin, crystal meths, alcohol, benzodiazepines, which is your Urbanols, your sleeping tablets, and your anti-anxiety tablets, fentanyl, cannabis. Some of these are legal, some of them aren't. Of course, alcohol is the one that really affects the liver and also the heart. And we mostly think of addictions as somebody with a needle or a syringe or under a bridge, or somebody who's really poor. And, you know, our image of somebody, Hollywood images, makes our image of somebody who's using a substance as somebody who's dangerous and violent. But in actual fact, we don't know. It could be anybody in the room, anybody in our society. It's got no level of socioeconomic background. Then we've got binging, blackouts for drinking. We've got magic mushrooms. So some of these are hallucinogenic, which means that they put you on a trip, then your mind goes places. So you feel like you are Superman or Superwoman. You can do all these wonderful things because they alter the chemicals in the brain. Things like Ritalin as well, which is our focus medication, codeine, petrol, thinners, diet tablets. So there's a lot here. We need a nice deep breath on all of these. So just, you know, it's just take note of what's your substance of choice. And it's interesting, Kevin, I think we were having a chat before around, you know, it's this time of the year. What do we do when we go celebrate? Or we have birthdays, or we have Christmas parties, we have a drink, or we have something that's available to us. So in our society, it's very normalized. Alcohol drinking is very normalized, so that you can see like where it can fit in, where it can cross over as well. All right, so let's go move on. Yeah.
I just want to add on that point about the culture that we've grown up in South Africa. And part of that question, and I think we also, you know, asked this question last time we touched on, is to kind of understand, like, what is the reality of what is the environment that you find yourself in, and who is this what do you identify with? And as South Africans, we identify as having a good time and usually using substance to support that, right? So it almost feels like it's natural, like that we have this inclination that you know, if we celebrate, it has to be with some type of substance, right? And you know, essentially that's part of the questioning. If you do feel like this might be something getting out of hand, or you're not coping with it, that's a conversation that we really need to touch in. But someone's just asking, now that we're on this, someone's asked a question about, do you believe alcohol is a drug?
So in the sense of, yes, it is, you know, it's a substance. So when we talk about addictions, we don't just talk about drugs and processes and that. Alcohol's got a mind altering. So drugs mind alter. So if you put it in that category, anything that alters the mind or the brain function, that is considered a drug, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, so then moving on to the next part, and I know this is some of the stats you wanted to share, Karen.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. So when I looked up these stats around, and especially for me, as I said, gambling is very, it's a very prevalent one, because we don't realize how it can be so addictive, and especially in our society. So I looked up some stats around, and these were quite shocking, I must say, because if you look at the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation, so they have their own stats, people calling in saying, I need help. And I love the tagline, winners know when to stop. It's like, do we? it's like it's like counterproductive, right? So
Completely.
winners don't know when to stop. Then they call the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation, and then here we get stats about 4,000 plus individuals in the 2024 and 2023, but the 2023 and 22 we only had almost half of that. So you can see in 2 years our stats have grown around gambling. And I think it's got a lot to do with the devices. Before we'd go to an actual casino, you would go to a venue. Here you can gamble on your phone. It's linked to your bank account. So things like this in the stats, where it says that according to the 2023-24 financial year wages, the turnover reached 14 trillion, up to 40% of the year. People are using their savings or part of their salary. They're actually putting it in their budget. When I read that, Kevin, I was traumatized for days. That we can actually put that in our budget, gambling. So instead of buying our food and having, just our basics, we are putting gambling and into our budget for that. So those stats were quite, yeah. I think people are looking and reading through it. You can also see, like, wow, Karen.
But
And
Karen,
then
I
the
also want
survey,
to,
around 50% of gamblers. Yes. Yeah, sure, Kevin.
sorry, I know there's a slight delay, but what I want to reiterate about
Yes.
that budget conversation is, guys, there's absolutely no judgment here. The fact is that some
Mm.
people do this, right? And for me, Karen, especially from a coaching perspective, if you're budgeting for your drug habit, that's cool. Like that's an absolute choice, and you have the choice to do that. What's interesting is that, if we're just looking at stats and we're looking at the impact that it has on society, I think that's a big conversation and a necessary one. And I think it's just to reiterate that, part of that choice that we're making may not be the most effective choice, but you're completely entitled to that choice, right?
Yes, absolutely, Kevin. And I think that's important to see, even when we do get stats, is that how is that impacting, first of all, the person, the community, the family. So it's got a broader sense. It's almost like those layers. So when we choose something, we choose it as a coping mechanism or something that makes us feel good. But when it starts impacting the other levels, when we start losing our property and our cars and our houses and our family members, then we know that we're on a slippery slope. So yes, it's just about knowing that balance, and also knowing, yes, we can still do the things that we want to make us feel better, but it's also noticing when it starts to slip and slide.
Yeah.
Exactly. And where was this? Oh, the 50% of gamblers say they include gambling in their monthly budget. 16 said they borrowed money to gamble, and 15% said they could not control their desire. Okay. So there's
Yeah.
just some of that desire, that dopamine that's coming in.
Karen, one question here on that, on the
Yes.
gambling while we're here
Yes.
is, would you say gambling addiction is less about money and more about the emotional high of winning, or the escape it offers?
Yes, good question. And when we get to the epigenetics part, is that you'll see that it is a combination of it. It's that. So when we talk about process, it's like, if I go out and I buy my bottle of wine, so I'm thinking about that in the morning. I'm thinking about, oh, I'm going to go later and I'm going to buy my wine. And so it's making me feel quite excited and euphoric. And then I go and I get my wine and I get home. So it's not just drinking the wine. It's the same with the gambling. It's the process of it. So that I pour my wine, I look at my wine in the glass, the color, the quantities are already just explaining that. You see what's happening in the brain. Lots of things are going on. So the gambling process is the levels. Can I get to the next level? And maybe the next one will be a win, and then I can be a winner. And what does a winner look like?
Yeah.
Back to the identity.
Someone just
Yes.
mentioned now, thank you for that. More people need to understand that there is no judgment, and just thanked for that conversation, because I think part of getting a grip on addiction in itself is to know that, especially when you're dealing with coaches who are professional and coaches who are aimed at helping, it's not about the judgment. It's really about, okay, cool, so these are your set of options and choices that you make for your life. Really good. And I've been guilty of this question before. One of my coaches said to me, so, and because I was getting results I wasn't proud of, and all the question is like, so how's that working for you? It's like, well, it's not, and that was the really, it really sank in, because the choices I was making up at that point, in my life, was like, it's not working. It's like, okay, cool. So now we know that choice isn't working for you. What are the other choices you'd like to pursue? So I think it's a really important, just an awareness. But Karen, what I'm excited about is the epigenetics. And I know that this is something you speak about a lot. So give us some insight on this, because I think a lot of people may not actually be aware of this connection.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And yes, I'm glad that people are putting questions in the chat block around. Also, there's a lot of shame attached to any kind of substance use, and is about a moral issue. And again, we want to make aware that actually things like alcohol, in the DSM-5 and in the other categories of medical support, it's actually categorized as a disease. So when you have a disease, we wouldn't judge somebody if they have a diabetes, or any other kind of disease. So we need to just see, what is it that we're judging? Is it are we looking at it as a moral? Well, why don't you just quit, right? And it's not that easy, And this is why it's not that easy. Okay. So let's look at the epigenetics and the genetics part. So I'm very passionate about the epigenetics, because when I first started I did some neuropsychology as well, and I started to realize, like, wow, we can actually change the way that we are, so our genetics we can't change. So that's solid. You see those strands on the picture here? That's your DNA. So your DNA sequencing, you can't change. That's permanent, right? And it's inherited from your parents. When you're born, you've got all these genetic predispositions. Some of us are predisposed to mental health issues, or even addictions in a way, because it's become along the line. But epigenetics is changes in the gene expression. So the expression is on the outside. So when you think of epigenetics, you think of on the outside. So it's reversible, and it can be changed by lifestyle and environment. And that's the amazing part, because often people come and say, Karen, I've got this problem. I don't see any hope. I don't know how I'm going to get out of it. It's, it's everywhere I am in my environment. It's in my community. I feel like hopeless. So I want to give some hope that you can. We have a thing called neuroplasticity, which means our brain is not fixed. So we might think that, and we're constantly getting these new neurons being firing in our brain, and then we can make changes to the epigenetic part. So the link to addictions, let's have a look at that. So addictions changes the brain pathways. So this is a little bit more technical, but just for the listeners to understand that there's changes that happen in the brain. So it's not only a biological thing, it's also a neurological that's happening in the brain. And it's a pathway to reward, motivation, and self-control. So our biggest thing is our reward factor, and that's our dopamine. So as human beings, we are constantly looking for rewards. How can we get it, so that we can feel better? So just some changes, the substances you can use cause a lasting epigenetic change in the brain cells. So if I'm craving that gambling or that looking at those, whatever it is for me, is it the visual or the sound or whatever, I start to crave that. And that's where the addictions crosses over from recreational, when you start to get the cravings of it. So some changes might be inherited. So there's a high hereditability. If you come from a family, so this is what we call trauma. If you come from a family who have a trauma background or childhood trauma, and you're watching your parent use a coping mechanism, you've got a high hereditability of using the same coping mechanism. So it's quite complicated, but it doesn't mean that it's your destiny. Okay, so I want the audience to realize that these things you can do something about them. So some of those may be inherited, yes, over generations. Yeah.
Just on that, the brain science part of it as well is,
Yes.
I've also had the opportunity to work with MIT's Neuroscience for Business program, and one of what we know about the brain is when your body is experiencing an alteration. So whether that's substance, whether that is, because of the genetics, because of how we are designed, part of your brain, also the emotional burst that you have, that flood of emotion, also will affect what decisions we make next, right? So very often, when a client phones me in a very emotional state, the immediate kind of connection that I reassure them with is, right now, with that emotional connection that your brain's going, that alteration that's going through right now, you're probably not going to make the best decision, right? So, and that's what's so important about understanding the brain side of things, is when you're feeling a certain kind of something versus when you're not feeling a certain kind of something, those two positions, what your brain's actively seeking information to, is going to be affected in any of those regions or any of those instances, right? So it's when your brain is and it's a quick realization, right? So whether it's substance, alcohol, drugs, whatever that is for you, your brain's not making the same decisions as when you're actually feeling confident and happy. Like, those are not necessarily activated at the same space. And I think so, it's just a quick personal reference to kind of gauge, am I going to make the right choice here? Am I in the right space, in the right brain frame to kind of make the right decision? And I think, it really helps when I have that subtle awareness about it.
And that's what it's about, Kevin. It's also, our primitive brain is the one that actually controls us 99% of the time. So the primitive brain is like that. It's at the back here, and it's it's part of that limbic system, and it switches off our thinking brain. And so I don't know if you know Daniel Goleman's lid. So it puts us in fight, flight, or freeze mode, and it switches off the prefrontal cortex. Which is, they've actually neuro-imaged it. It actually, there's no activity there. So we're not. So when you could ask me, like, Karen, what were you thinking? And actually, I wasn't thinking. So it's like, it's that exactly what you're explaining. I'm not thinking. I'm into the fight, flight, or freeze, or I'm being triggered, whatever it might be. I'm actually looking for a survival mechanism. I'm looking for safety. I'm looking for something to keep me safe, right? All right, so let's get into those environmental and emotional triggers. And we all know how we can get triggered emotionally, talking to what you're saying, Kevin, as well. So our stresses, and we've got many of those, our traumas, our neglect can switch on the addiction-related genes. So there's a big catch here, big realization. But positive environments switch off the harmful gene expressions. So this is where, you might have heard some of these neuro science people talk about switching genes on and off. Well, how can that happen? Well, this is epigenetics. That is what happens. And it also happens if you get some kind of disease in the body. You are able to switch these genes on and off with lifestyle, environment. And that's why we call it environmental. So social and emotional context play a major role in the genetic outcome. So often, Kevin will say to me, people, or Karen, I've been to rehab and it's just not working. It's the third or fourth time. But what happens is that you go back into the environment that you came from. So it's like expecting a different result with the same environment you put yourself back into. So there's changes to be made. And if we go to the next slide, you can see as well that how the recovery process and the way that coaching can help with that. So it is about rewriting your story and deciding and making conscious decisions. Very much what you were talking about as well, Kevin. So it's reversible. So you know that there's hope and there's recovery. So it can be reversed, but it's a conscious process. So this neuroplasticity allows the brain to heal and rewire. So it doesn't happen overnight. If you've got a habit, it doesn't matter what kind of habit. There's no bad or good habits. But if it's a habit that's impacting your emotions, your biology or physiology, it's not something you can automatically just change around. You've got to rewire the habit. Because when somebody phones you, Kevin, and it's like, oh, what did I do? What's wrong? We're wired to look at the negative. That's just how we're wired. So once you're wired like that, then you have to rewire your brain. So these are the types of things. The neuroplasticity helps to heal and rewire. And of course, healthy habits, nutrition, rest, positive gene expression. And if you choose to work through this with a coach, there's plenty of different types of professional supportive systems. Coaching is really powerful because it works with what's happening now and where you want to go to. It supports the self-awareness, self-regulation, awareness of the emotions, and the automatic or autonomic system. That's what you were talking about, Kevin, that automatic system. It just kicks over. So building resilience, coping tools, choices, facilitating transformation. These are all coaching tools that we develop to help clients. Encourage healthy dopamine sources. So what's healthy dopamine? And I love asking the audience this. So what do you do to get that healthy dopamine going? Exercise, singing, what's yours, Kevin? What's your go-to dopamine? What helps you to relax and be calm?
Yeah, singing is very often, and also for me, I've reorganized how I sit in traffic. So I use traffic as quiet time. So as much as I'm busy doing the traffic thing, I try to have it as a quiet time, and it really helps because it's an intentional awareness, even though I'm in the traffic.
Yes, and that's I love that. I love that example because I'd love the audience to pop it in the chat or whatever what they do, because when you become aware of those healthy coping mechanisms, you actually realize how much that supports you. So it's what we call resourcing. And this last point also talks to that. So rebuilding that prefrontal accountability for structure. Because often if I feel out of control, I want something to make me feel in control. And usually it could be a substance that I use or a process, or it could be something around something that I love to do, that I'd forgotten about. I think people sometimes forget what makes them really feel good because we haven't visited that for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So on that, on the conversation we're sharing, Corinne, I have a question that says, we've got a few here. So
right, let's go and have a.
Once we are triggered, can what once triggered us actually lose its power with healing, or do those triggers just show up in new forms?
Excellent question. So when we become triggered with things, it happens in the body. So I'll give an example. Say you were bullied by Trevor. Okay, I don't know why Trevor. Let's just take Trevor. So every time you hear the word Trevor, you get a reaction in the body. Okay, And the body has a memory, and then it remembers this. But when you start to go through a healing process and you unpack that, and where is that trigger that's happening in the body, you actually go down on the intensity. So what we're talking about here is intensity. The higher the intensity of the trigger, the more you're going to get triggered, and the emotional response is going to come up. But when you start to work with that, and the emotional and the intensity starts to come down, so it doesn't mean that you're never going to be triggered by Trevor, but the intensity is not going to be up here at that level anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to add what's in, there's so many various modalities that you can actually work with a coach through, and one of those is, the disassociation of that moment and that event in your life. So that disassociate, you can literally, go through a timeline process of disassociating the emotional connection that you have to an event, and because you distance yourself from it, and it's a visualization process. It's you're disconnecting from the emotional glue that holds you in that triggered space. And it's a very effective strategy to kind of really, and I think that's what's very often what we don't realize about the triggers, especially triggers that trigger our negative, bad emotion or behaviors. They very often come from, part of the identification that I have, when I was 17, and when I was, it comes from there. And the reality of the thing is, well, you're not 17 now, you're you now, right? So when your brain starts re-engineering and reforming that messaging, that also allows for, your approach to your own triggers, the awareness starts becoming, and that disassociation from the glue really helps you unpack that even further. And very often it feels quite relieving.
And there's something interesting, Kevin, that I was reading, because I do a lot of research, and they were saying that the brain actually, I don't know if any of the attendees also feel this, but when you hook onto something, your brain will just go round and round and round onto this thing. It will, like, you'll go to sleep and you're still thinking about it, and you wake up and you're still, it's like a washing machine, right? It goes round. So the brain has, and it's actually a survival mechanism, because if I'm I've got a tiger in the road, and I'm scared about it, I need to make sure that I'm safe, and I need to be able to control my environment, right? But the brain just hooks onto these negative parts. So what happens is, when you speak it, and even if you speak it to yourself, or that's what going to therapy is, or going to coaching is, that you actually speak what's going on in your brain out. So just saying the words releases it from your brain. So it was quite an interesting article. I thought, like, wow, that's great. I love that.
Another one,
So
Cara,
that's why
another
speaking
question.
up is so important. We often in training say, yeah, speak up, and it's not because we're saying it, because it's actually, it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, Kevin, I'm
Another
here.
Another one. So then, are some people more vulnerable to addiction? And if so, should those individuals consciously avoid potential triggers altogether? And especially, from the epigenetics, genetics kind of conversation. And essentially we are, right? We are more prone, if we do have a disposition to, be affected by something, we might be more prone to being addicted to it.
So there was also an interesting article on opioids. So opioids are those substances that affect our brain, and especially around pain. So if you've ever been in an accident, or they'll give you opioid medication, and it's highly addictive because it releases very high intensity of dopamines and the switch off hormone as well for pain. So this is what, and so what happens is, in there they say, look, well, so how come some people get addicted to opioids and others don't? And it's that predisposition in the body, because also it's part of that epigenetics and genetics. You see your family, this is their coping mechanism, and then you have less resilience around the coping. But I think it's more about the awareness of it. So if you're aware that you tend to move towards this for a coping mechanism, it's all about that awareness. So noticing that, okay, so if I go out with my friends and everyone's drinking, then I go for an hour instead of the whole night. because it's called something that we call less self-harm. So one of the recovery processes, if you work with this less self-harm, is that you say, I'm just going to lessen the space where I can harm myself in any way.
So another one
Yes.
is, if trauma or addiction can switch on certain genetic expressions, does living more consciously through stress management or boundaries help switch them off again?
Yes. It's a lifestyle. So anything,
Right, yeah.
anything that you change your lifestyle with, definitely. So if I'm more mindful, so Kevin, I come into a room and I'm immediately triggered, and I know that I'm going to get that survival mechanism, but I have coping tools like breathing exercises. So I will quickly go into breathing or some kind of mindfulness practice. It again immediately switches on my prefrontal cortex, which is my conscious. Okay, I know I'm triggered now. Let's see if I can get my body level down. So this is where that consciousness and mindfulness practice really does help. So the answer is
Absolutely.
definitely yes.
And I also think, Karen, like, for me, it was one of the tactics that my coaches have helped me with, and I've used it as a tactic as well in coaching. When part of a recurring behavior, is very stumbling, and it keeps happening, and you're like, and one of the coaching questions that I've come across and that I've used is, when now is a good time for you to start taking yourself seriously? Right. And I know it's, when you hear it like that, you're like, oh, like, why? Because I don't take myself seriously. And part of that conversation is really to start solidifying, that you engaged at a level saying, yeah, I want to do this for my life. I want to change my life. But I'm not so serious about, making it happen. Right. And just that frame kind of is like lands, and you're like, oh, wow, I don't like that. But it is a strong question to ask, if you want to seriously change things, how serious are you? And, it does give you a bit of reference to what changes are possible. Another question here is change more about geography or about how we show up in the space we're in?
Right. That's a great question. So that takes me straight to nature nurture debate. Takes me straight there. So is it about nature or is it about nurture? So nature is your biology, nurture is your environment. So, we can debate this one. I mean, and they are debating it for years and years. And I don't have a preference. I think it's a bit of both, a bit of the nature and the nurture of it. It's the biology of it, and it's also our environment. But I wanted to say something around, getting to know yourself. So I'm not sure, it's kind of an indirect way of answering this question. But when you know yourself, your self-awareness is key, because the more that you get to know yourself, the more that you know what is helpful and what is harmful. So for argument's sake, I'll give you a personal example. So for me, getting sick or anything around health is a huge trigger, because in my family history, my mom had every type of disease you can think of. So anytime that she would get sick, immediately that would bring out a reaction in me as well. So I would not do anything harmful to my body, like put a substance in or do something that's harmful, because that is something that's so important to me. It's part of my value system. So this is where self-awareness is so important. So are you valuing, and similar to what you're saying here, are you valuing or respecting yourself, your body, your mind? Because you only have one chance. This is it, right? This is it. You have one chance of taking care of yourself. And I know that it's not that easy, because people say there's all of these other external factors, and that's the environment. So sometimes we have to remove ourselves from the environment. We actually have to move, or we have to go different places, or we have to voice it and say, look, I'm healing here. I need your help. And that's where we start to actually voice out what we need.
And I think that lends itself to that, are you taking yourself serious? Because, and it ties into the self-awareness, it ties in, if, do you have to move? Well, maybe you might have to. Do you have to really just find yourself a whole different group of people to spend time with? Do you have to make definite life decisions? And, not always, but sometimes that will impact how you live your life, and what choices you are making. Another one asks, for someone who's done the deep inner work, therapy steps, coaching, all of the things, do you believe it's either possible to have a healthier relationship with something that once had control over you?
That's an interesting question.
So,
So I think, yeah,
so for
well,
me,
I can see something. Yes.
my immediate go-to for that is, it depends on how much meaning you've given this thing that you're referring
Mm,
to. Because I use alcohol as, the reason I use it as an example, because I've been there, I've done that. I've got the T-shirt of, drinking because I was alone, or drinking because I didn't feel good. And eventually I got to a point where I was going, well, this thing, this substance, this external thing of my life has more control over my happiness than I do. So for me, that was a very obvious kind of reframe for, and that's not going to apply to everyone. It's not going to be that easy for everyone.
mm,
And all the things, I think what is essential to hear about today's conversation, all of these things um, sound very simple, but they're not easy, right? And like doing the tactical little movements, changing, reframing, breathing, like doing the things that actually help. They're quite simple, but not always easy to do. And I think, so for that question, I would consider, if I know that my life has given me enough evidence to show me that going down that route is going to have this negative effect, that's a choice. And if it affects your life to that degree, why do you need it? Right?
mm.
So it's
So
to
I
be
think
a rational
it's an
and understand.
it's an interesting one as well, and I like that question because it also puts you in the frame of that intensity. So the intensity for that substance or that process was very high because it was, giving you that high and that feeling and that feel good. And then when you work with it, like that person said, working through the process of it, the intensity will come down. And I think it's also got something to do with a purpose. When you have a purpose or meaning in life, that association with that substance or process, the meaning dissolves, the meaning of
Mm.
that. Because once you have your own meaning and you take yourself out of that and you look at something else that gives you much more of that feeling of purpose and meaning, because as human beings we want a purpose and we want to feel like we belong, and mostly people socially drink because that's what everybody else is doing. It's a belonging thing. So where do we belong is a question.
Corinne, I think to that point that you mentioned now is, once you get to that side of that conversation that you're giving the meaning, right, it also feels really empowering, right? You feel like I'm in control. I'm more in control now than, when that stuff was happening to my world. And again, that to me is, it's a decision, it's a choice. It's really wanting you to tap into, well, what is your belonging? If you say, well, I want to belong, the question is, okay, cool. If you're not sure where that is, get yourself a coach, speak to someone that you trust, that you can really rely on, to find what belonging means to you. And therefore, because you've given a whole new meaning, a whole reframe, suddenly your own behavior starts shifting and changing, and you just show up differently. And the thing that you used to need is a thing that you don't need no longer, based on the fact that your meaning for why you do what you're doing shows up differently.
Yeah.
Another
And we must also just reiterate that things like substances and that which alter the brain, is that you can't do these things on your own. There will be a detox process. There will be, and to do it with a professional, because the body will go through this. It has to detox through the whole process so that it can get back into the kind of normal way of processing. So just to reiterate for those on board, please just get professional help. You need support. Sorry, Kevin. Yes, the next question.
One that was quite interesting, and I think, Karen, because you really work with people in this circumstance, is what happens if I open up and people then see me differently afterwards. And I think that's it. There's a fear. There's a big fear that people will see me differently, and absolutely. So, what is that How do we navigate that?
Mhm. Yes, and it's interesting. And that's why a lot of people don't want to mention mental health. Like, I've got a mental health issue, because they know people will judge them, or they say they're not competent enough. So if I was once addicted to a substance, now I'm not competent in my work. But it's actually that awareness that you're also part of that, giving knowledge over to other people. And I think this talks to, like, I am an alcoholic. Well, no, you're not an alcoholic. Part of you is addicted to a substance, but it's not all of you. So it's very important to see that it doesn't define who you are. It's just a part of your life. So if something happened in your childhood, you had no control over that. So that is part of it. It will always be part of you, but it doesn't define who you are. So I think this is it's a very personal one. Some people will share just to help others to feel free so that they can share, because this is what happens. And I do a lot of emotional impact sessions with different individuals and groups. I do a lot of group work. And when people share, afterwards, everyone says, like, wow, I didn't know that you felt like I felt, and I don't feel so alone. So that is like a constant theme. I felt so alone, and now I feel like I'm not alone. So it's very personal. Yeah.
The last question, because then we just want to share some stuff on where you can get more help, guys, and some links and stuff. When you change your relationship with something like alcohol, it often changes your relationships too. How do I stay grounded and connected when others don't understand my change?
Yes. So this is a bit linked to, like, family. Like, you have a role in your family, right? You're the rescuer or you're the fixer. So everybody knows that's your role. And then you change, like, you will change when you come to coaching. And then everyone goes, like, who's that person? I don't recognize them anymore. So this is what happens. You've actually got a little bit of a new identity. And people change, we all know change is difficult. So they're not going to particularly like it, or they're not going to know how to navigate it. Am I there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Kevin? Yeah.
I
They're not
can.
going to know how to navigate it. And it's about actually explaining that I'm going through this process. I'm discovering myself. I'm setting some boundaries. And, it's interesting, because I grew up in a family where there were no boundaries. I didn't know what a boundary was. And then I started to get into this field of mental health and well-being. And I realized that part of my mental health is linked to boundary setting. So I need to get a skill. So this is what it is. You start to learn a skill. And there's things like assertive language and reframing that we use to help you to navigate that. Yeah. And then you really get to know your relationships well.
And I think, Karen, last time we spoke, we mentioned identity. Like, how do you identify with the world in your life, in situations? And when you do start making changes like this, it most definitely will start changing who you are, what you identify with, and that probably will have a knock-on effect in relationships. So potentially you may also start losing friends. You might start losing colleagues based on the fact that well, you don't drink with me, or we don't go to the bathroom for that thing that we take every lunch hour. You might actually, that will shift, and essentially then it's that deeper layer of, like, well, who are you and who do you choose to be from here on outwards, right? Because it will actually have a definitive identity shift conversation. And that's what's beautiful about having a coach, right? It's really connecting that coach, helping you navigate those conversations a little bit better.
So I've been loving these questions, Kevin. We could go on all day. So thank you to everyone for posing the questions. And I'm glad that everyone felt comfortable to just like pop them in there. And this is it. It's about getting the conversation going around difficult topics like addiction. You know, we often kind of shun it, or we put it in the corner and we say like, no, we can't, just like suicide. No, we don't talk about suicide. But actually, if we don't talk about it, then we need to understand it, you know, so we're just gaining some understanding. So thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to the listeners for the questions.
Absolutely, guys. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be doing this, right? So thank you for even being on the other side of this conversation. So just to share, guys, if you want to, because we literally run out of time, we've got 5 minutes left, but if you want to go and check it out, Karen and myself are both on the Hello Coach platform app. So, and you'll see right there under health and wellbeing, you can actually go and choose that section, and you can actually connect with one of the professionals. Karen's right there. She'll be able to, and she's under most of these, so she'll be able to connect with you. And that's what's beautiful about the Hello Coach app. It does afford us opportunities with a variety of areas we want to work at. And, you know, if addiction is one thing, you can work through addiction with Karen, then you can work through career and growth, you can work through stress and burnout. There's a number of elements that you can work through, one coach or many coaches, to really help you get to where you're going in life. And then lastly, guys, go and register today. You can just scan the QR code and you'll see it will take you right there. It will give you an opportunity to look at your overview, what those areas that you are, what your booking looks like, and you literally can connect with your coach in the palm of your hand. And that's what's beautiful about the Hello Coach platform. Lastly, this is on today's video, but also last week's video. You can actually scan the QR code, go and check out your highest needs, because it's a beautiful indicator to support the process of what it is you need in your world. And then, Karen, just to close off today, if you have some ending sentiments or last sort of perspectives that you want to share with the audience today, what will that be?
I think you know me by now, Kevin. Deep breath. Take a deep breath. So as you're listening, just breathe in and out, because you got this. And just remember, you don't have to do this alone. Okay, that's my closing thoughts, that you reach out for your support. Just reach out. And deep
Absolutely.
breathing.
And guys, yeah, I mean, essentially that's what we do. That's what we're passionate about. So, you know, if you do need to reach out, what we will do is there is an assessment that I will leave in the links, and also in the YouTube video, you'll see we're going to create a link for you to go and actually look at the self-assessment addiction assessment. It's a self-assessment, and it really asks you some really beautiful insight questions around awareness and control, emotional triggers, consequence and impact, your motivation and change, and then gives you a bit of a scoring that you can do for yourself. So it's a nice opportunity for you to check yourself on that. And then, you know, once you have some insights on that, you can reach out and connect with a coach. And again, guys, coaching in itself, as we are held by very strict guiding ethics boards that really look at what we do. So for us, you know, our intentions are to help. So anything and everything you share is always taken with an absolute agreement as a coach that you're going to connect with. So, and you'll find that, you know, because we have passions for this, it's probably one of the best decisions to do is to get yourself a coach and connect with a coach. Karen, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for the insights on I love the epigenetics part. It really gives us just another layer of like, well, how do we navigate this and what could be impacting it? But for myself, guys, join us for the coaching hour. If not here, go and check it out on YouTube. There's a whole bunch on. It's called the Lunchtime Series. And Corin is on there as well. So go and check it out, guys. For myself and Corin, have a fantastic day.
Super.
And thanks for being here. Corin, chat to you soon. Have a fantastic one. Cheers for now, guys.
Super. Thanks, everybody. Bye.